and experiments. And we have a great panel. Let me start with Bruno Felipe Rodrigues Moreira. Bruno is the advisor of International Affairs Department at the Central Bank of Brazil. We also have Cristina Reis, who is the Undersecretary for Sustainable Economic Development, Secretariat of Economic Policy, Ministry of Finance, and Assistant Professor at the Federal University of ABC. And we have Luis Perefo, who is the Adjunct Professor at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. She holds a PhD from Cambridge University, and she's worked as a senior economist and trade officer at the British Embassy in Brasilia. So if we start with you, Bruno.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Bom dia, bonjour. Rui Moreira. Olo. Dobre utra. Buongiorno. I think buenos dias. So I think I have covered many of the audience. So my idea here is to give you some insights for further research. From my experience, I have been working the Central Bank of Brazil, most particularly in the International Affairs Department for the last 10 years in negotiations of financial issues. So I would like to inspire you to further research with this experience. Don't expect from me the same theoretical sophistication from other presentations, because I'm mostly a practical guy and also a soldier of the central bank in international negotiations. I like this map to give us a different perspective when we think international relations. And I would like to inspire you to think differently. So first of all, a disclaimer. The opinions in this presentation are strictly personal and do not represent the official opinion of the Central Bank of Brazil. I'm here much as a person who has experience in this issue, but I will be in a much more difficult situation to have a rigid statement if I represent the Central Bank of Brazil. So I would like to bring you my experience and my personal perspective with that, and not the official opinion. And all the information in this presentation is public. I need to say that to save my skin. So the presentation structure, the objectives, context, and I will talk a little bit about G20, BRICS, COP30, other debate arena, because we have overlapping in this discussion, hot topics for Global South, and final remarks. So let's go straight to the main objective of this presentation is to raise some challenges faced by Global South in recent international discussions with a special focus on climate issues. So I'm here to pave the way and inspire you for new research, new articles, and mainly your job is to innovate. My job is just to use the general knowledge and try to maximize the national interest, subject to many boundaries, such as time, asymmetric information asymmetry, personnel, and many others. So my job is try to maximize the national interest in real-day negotiations, subject to many red lines, and your job is to innovate. And I would like to inspire you, pave the way for you to think differently. So the concept of Global South, first of all, we have some general idea of countries with high social inequalities, colonial past, lack of voice in international organizations. I'm sorry for the graph here, it's different from the configuration in my computer. We have in the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, the creation of G77 and G24, specifically for the IMF discussions. And today we have more BRICS as a proxy of this representation of Global South. The G77 continued to exist, but yeah, BRICS gained momentum in these negotiations. So today we have new leadership, a new international coalition, and this debate of nationalism versus multilateralism in many countries, not only in the North, in the US particularly, but in many countries. And Brazil is in a good position in this scenario because it has a huge population, territory, and questionable predictability for investments, but we have biodiversity. This discussion between the limits to growth from the 70s, from the Stockholm conference, and today we have modern instruments such as the TFFF, but also discussion about oil exploitation in the new discovery, new reserves, lack of hard power. So the participation of Brazil in the global scenario is by example, WTO, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, International Criminal Court, etc. An environment, low inflation and environment favorable for reforms. I'm not necessarily supporting these reforms on labor market, pension, taxation, but just underlining that Brazil, or at least the Congress, it's inclined for reforms. So about the G20, in terms of structure, the history back to the end of 90s, and the group has two tracks, the finance track and Sherpa tracks, and some task force for both of them. Some issues are more related to the MOFs and other to central banks. The Sherpa track is led by a personal emissary of G20 leaders. In case of Brazil, is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And each track has some working groups, and there are some examples of, and all decisions are made, requires consensus. I'm sorry for the layout. So Brazilian priorities in 2024, social inclusion and fight against hunger and poverty, promoting sustainable development, reforming global governance institutions, and some results we had last year. Each working group and task force define recommendation for G20 members. These recommendations are not mandatory, but since the countries participated in the negotiations, there is some damage to the country's image if they don't adopt it. As an example, for the task force for climate, we have this develop and expand FX liquidity facilities, and all the text negotiated, we try always to link with the general priorities. So in this case, reforming global governance, promoting sustainable development, and these final outcomes are linked to the priorities. So the group in 2025, until the November, we have the South African presidency. Some priorities: strengthen disaster resilience, debt sustainability for low-income countries, mobilize finance for just transition, and critical minerals also for sustainable development. And in December, we will change the presidency to the US, and the country who hosts the presidency defines the priorities of work. So in this case, most probably the environmental issues and climate will not be a priority, and we are in doubt, not sure yet, but we are in doubt even if the working group for climate will work next year. So BRICS and the Brazilian presidency, the history dates back to the beginning with Jim O'Neill from Goldman Sachs, and since 2009 we had a summit or head of state. Similar to G20, the BRICS has a Sherpa track and finance track. Some priorities during the Brazilian presidency: Global South cooperation, BRICS partnership for social, economic, and environmental development, with 6 key areas. that give you the one idea of what's being discussed, what's on the spotlight in this moment. Some documents, a declaration on climate finance, declaration on global governance of artificial intelligence, partnership for elimination of social determined disease. We had in July the summit. So we still, there are still some ongoing work, but we anticipated and made in July due to the COP30. So as we have a limited team, we needed to anticipate this meeting of BRICS, but it's still some ongoing work. And some principles important to underline: defense of multilateralism, the WTO, WHO, and the UN, reforming global governance, including Bretton Woods institutions, support for the Paris Agreement and the NDCs. So perspectives for BRICS. This is my personal interpretation. The BRICS expansion increased the political weight of the bloc, but increased the asymmetry among members. Thus, further expansion should be preceded by prior harmonization of practice. We have made some surveys within the group, and we understand that there are many questions that needed still to be more harmonized before further expansion of the group. Countries' engagement is not homogeneous and changes according to their particular agenda in the international context. It's difficult for establishing long-term actions. One good exception is NDB. So it depending on the year, the political cycle of that particular country, we have a greater or reduced engagement with BRICS. So it's difficult to define long-term actions. The US presidency increased the difficulty for members. In case of Brazil, political rivalry. In case of China, trade. Russia, Iran, and recently India, we had sanctions. In South Africa, the question of land reform. So for COP30, I'm sorry again for the layout, it's always different in my computer. Some opportunities and challenges. So the symbolic and political significance of hosting the COP in the Amazon, but we have logistical and accommodation difficulties, expectation for ambitious climate commitments, but skepticism regarding US and other countries' commitments. Some good Brazilian initiatives like bioeconomy, energy transition, biome protection, but budgetary restrictions. Regional experience like green financing, Amazonian consortia, but in a political environment, it's a difficult negotiation with governors and mayors from opposition parties. And an interesting debate regarding mitigation versus adaptation. In South African priorities, where they defined that we need to scale up resources for adaptation, but there is a general problem of adaptation is much more local, and mitigation is easier for a central government to define a general solution, like financing solar panels or general policy options. For mitigations, is easier for the central government. Adaptation, you need to cooperate with local governments and in a much more fragmented scenario. So we need, I totally agree, we need to scale up resource for adaptation, but the scenario for adaptation is much more complex. So some perspectives for COP30. Potential for BRICS alignment, as we have seen in the BRICS. Potential for alignment in climate negotiations based on the work done in this group until now. The Brazilian presidency is trying to overcome the difficulties in negotiation by giving more voice to previous COP presidency. That gives great possibility of agreement. Brazil is trying to make a enlarge the deal with the previous presidencies that give momentum to the political alignment, but at the same time we have a lot of restrictions, mainly because of the US and other countries rethinking their engagements. So the impact of central governments against the COP may be partially compensated by subnational entities and the business community in each jurisdiction. So we must not think about a country as a single block, but you have within these countries some subnational entities that may have commitment with environmental targets and also the enterprise. So it's a much more complex scenario. It's not a single president decision to may not engage in COP commitments, but we have these subnational entities, the entrepreneurs trying to engage. So it's difficult to coordinate. Of course, the political will makes a difference, but we must understand in this complex scenario. And the challenge of combining economic growth with low climate impact increasingly involves nature-based solutions, country platforms, information disclosure, and blended finance. And I would like to say to my colleagues from the previous panels about blended finance, you need to raise your voice because blended finance is still, I would say, common sense, common understanding, or even in developing countries. So you need to underline more the difficulties. I agree with some of the question raised in the other panel about blended finance, but I just bring to you this idea. This is the common sense. This is the dominant understanding. So other debate arenas, we have to Luisa will tell you about the general context much better than me, but I would like just to underline some possibilities and for you to understand that many other debates are intertwined with these climate discussions. In case of IMF, US demand to return to the core of the institution and set aside other issues such as climate. And we have also the quota review in 2028, which will bring us a new balance of power and greater participation of EMDs in decisions. In case of Brazil, we had Article 4 and FSAP, which is, I think you might know, a general overview of Brazilian economy. And we have a problem with a specific tax that is considered like some kind of multiple exchange rate currency. In case of this Financial Stability Board, a difficulty in developing actions due to members' disagreement about what brings threat menace to the financial stability, such as climate. In case of OECD, we have a good environment, but for exchange of best practice, but we still face doubts about for the future of EMDs. Will Argentina or Brazil join this group? That's still uncertain. So on climate issues, we have NGFS, the Network for Greening the Financial System, with good expansion since 2017, but lacking teeth, where we are only on a voluntary basis. The BIS represents good opportunities for technical solutions within the tax print, and the priorities for the tax print is defined each year by the G20 presidency. It's a cooperation between the BIS and G20 presidency each year. So we had recently the presidency of South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, India, Saudi Arabia. So in many of these cases, the solution were suited for developing countries. The ISSB, we have difficulty in application of S1 and S2, mainly for SMEs. and uncertainty about the S3 or S4. In the case of TNFD, still uncertainty and possible conflict with ISSB S3. So some hot topics, data gaps and disclosure, mainly about the proportionality for SMEs, the international architecture reform, how we harmonize the operation of multilateral development banks, NDBs, and reduce the bureaucracy. Technical cooperation, capacity building. In many developing countries, we have limited human resources. And particularly in this case of our adaptation, we have to act locally. So we need cooperation with local governments that have even less human resource qualified for developing projects. Fintech and AI, the main difficulty in this case is multilateral governance and digital and infrastructure. We have not the technological limitation for establishing a payment service, but this matter of governance as well. So currency volatility, we have this good example of liquidity facility. Taxonomy, the main difficulty is interoperability. I'm already finishing, sorry. Credit rating agencies, are these agencies biased when it comes to classifying projects in developing countries? There are some. How can we improve the transparency and disclosure? The challenge of double materiality, granularity, robustness, and comparability of data in this case. And final remarks, G20 will face challenges building consensus of under US leadership, and climate will probably be a no priority or low priority until the following presidency. BRICS could lead the way for the Global South with good technical knowledge and improving forecast methodologies. COP30 face a double risk of logistical problems and delegations disinterest in climate agenda, but the risk can be partially mitigated by greater engagement from subnational entities. Regulators fear the adverse effects of direct interference in private agency regarding transition. So the chosen path until now has been to prioritize disclosure. And with that, I finish my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruno. And now we have Luisa Perefo. Once again, she's adjunct professor at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Bom dia. I think I'll have the same problem that Bruno had with the layout of the PPT. So it's really a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation and congratulations really for the organizing like such an amazing event. So my talk will be on climate finance and global power shifts, and the question I have, which is, can the Global South rewrite the rules? What I'm going to try to do is to connect the theme of this conference, so financing climate action in the South, the scope for innovation, with the focus of this session, which is Southern initiatives and experiments, with the issue that is my main research area, which is the international monetary system, dollar-dominated, which poses a number of challenges for Global South countries in general. And I think this is like the main argument of my presentation, that there are 3 points that capture these interconnections. So I think first, many of the problems in climate finance are as old as the challenges of financing development. Some issues, of course, they are specific to climate, but I think a lot of them reflect broader, long-standing difficulties the Global South has faced in accessing finance. So the first point I'll make in this presentation is that not all climate finance challenges are really about climate. I think many are older than the climate agenda itself and are rooted in this international monetary and financial system that succeeded the Bretton Woods period. To that extent, I believe that true financial innovation isn't just about creating new instruments, but is also about, and I think that showed a bit in Bruno's presentation, advancing political and institutional strategies that reduce structural dependency and expand monetary sovereignty for the Global South, something that is probably easier said than done. And this is where I get to my second 2 points. So the second point is that I think both the climate and the monetary agendas, they tell stories about power distribution and about the difficulties of addressing global problems collectively in a world where there is no supranational authority to enforce compliance with global agreements. And I think this is becoming even clearer amid the ongoing shift in the global balance of power. So I would say the US influence is showing signs of a relative decline, although this is more clear in some areas than in others. But it still remains the hegemon. Europe's weight is more clearly receding. And China, of course, has rising dramatically across many domains, alongside a less pronounced but also noticeable rise of other countries in the so-called Global South. And third, and I think this is perhaps the most provocative point, especially because I'm with my colleagues here from the Brazilian government, even though some of these shifts have opened space for the Global South to advance its own initiatives and institutions, I don't think it's clear that these alternatives to the current system will be able to tackle the deeper structural problems of asymmetry and hierarchy of the international monetary and financial system. I'll try to explore each of these points in greater depth, but before that, I just wanted to show some data to illustrate this global power shift. So there are several attempts that try to measure it. They usually include economic indicators, but also data on technology, military expenditure, and so on. And in any of those indexes, we can see that China's rise is exceptional. Here are the links to the works. I can share this presentation afterwards. But then there is also another feature, which is the issue of currency dominance, in which there is a major asymmetry between the weight of the US in the global economy and the role of the US dollar for the various purposes of international transactions. So of course, dollar dominance is not the only thing that explains the problems of financing for the Global South, but because we don't have a lot of time to explore this here, I thought it was just worth at least reminding that this is an important feature of the current international monetary and financial system, and that the exceptional rise we see of China is not matched, at least so far, in the monetary area. So this, unfortunately, is a picture of my hometown in Porto Alegre in May last year, which faced the worst climate disaster in its history. So there were massive floods that affected nearly 2.4 million people in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, including my own. And it's just to remind us of like the concrete examples that we are currently living. So one way to look to the issue of climate change challenges in the Global South is to understand them in substantial part as problems of development, which in turn are also, at least in part, a challenge of lack of financing. We had in the 50s and the 60s the discussions of a development paradox by Latin American structuralists. So to industrialize and overcome dependency, peripheral economies needed more trade, aid, transfer of technology, and development finance, which mean relying even more on the same flows. So today we face a new version of this paradox, and the Global South still relies on those same external flows to build climate resilience. One result of this is a vicious cycle between that and climate vulnerability. So countries that are highly exposed to climate risk, they often have limited fiscal space. Climate disasters, they create enormous financial pressures. This is what my state and my hometown faced last year, and still dealing with the effects of that. So this is why I think linking climate adaptation to the broader financial and monetary system reform is so critical. And I think these agendas, they are being increasingly intertwined. So there is a growing understanding that addressing climate finance requires engaging with the need to reform the international monetary and financial system, and also that any meaningful reform of this system must at some extent integrate climate considerations at its core. I think that materializes perhaps more explicit with the attempt to create a climate finance architecture under the Paris Agreement back in 2015, and mobilize financial resources to help developing countries with both mitigation and adaptation costs. But this connection between climate and monetary and financial reforms appears too in other ways, such as with the creation of the New Development Bank by the BRICS countries. So the New Development Bank was created back in 2014 and was to a great extent a response to the insufficient reforms in the Bretton Woods institutions that came in the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis, which despite being historical reforms, they still fail to reflect the growing economic weight of the Global South in global governance. So it's a bank that since the very beginning has put sustainability as a central pillar of its structure. It has committed to the Paris Agreements and the UN SDGs, and it's committed to allocate 40% of its funding to sustainable development projects. So I think it's an interesting case study because it's an institution that brings together several agendas: climate and sustainable development, the importance of financing for development, and the role of the Global South in global economic governance. And I think the NDB can be considered an innovation mechanism for the Global South for a fairer model of development finance, one which explicitly incorporates the climate agenda. And I think what is interesting about the NDB is that it innovates perhaps more in political terms than in terms of financial instruments. So there are some very interesting characteristics in the governance of the NDB. Both capital and voting power are distributed equally among its founding members. And as we know, there is really no parallel of this feature in any other major multilateral financial institution. At the IMF and at the World Bank, as we know, the United States holds veto power, and in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was created by China more or less at the same time of the NDB, China plays a dominant role. Another difference is that presidency rotates among the 5 members, and again, in the IMF and the World Bank, leadership has traditionally been held by an European and an American, respectively. Decisions in the NDB are made by simple qualified majority, which in practice also means that no single country has veto power, and this I think is very important. The NDB doesn't impose any conditionalities or tie project approval and disbursements to changes in national policies, which is also a major difference compared to the Bretton Woods institutions. So I think there is a lot of political significance in the things that the NDB does. But then, perhaps for that very reason or related to it, progress can be very slow. So it's not easy to challenge the status quo, especially when starting from a position of weaker capacities and less power. This is reflected to some extent in the size of the NDB, which has an authorized capital of 100 billion of US dollars, putting it in the category of medium-sized multilateral development banks. It is also reflected in how much it can truly innovate, since the dollar still remains the dominant currency in its operation, followed, as you can see, by the renminbi, but very much less than the dollar participation, and the euro, even though there is an expectation to increase funding in local currencies, which, if I'm not mistaken, is supposed to be about 30%. So while the NDB in some sense, a dream coming true, as Stephanie Griffith-Jones once said, as the bank had been just created. And I think in many ways, a political victory of the Global South in reshaping the international monetary and financial system in its favor. I think it also illustrates the challenges of breaking away from structural dependence on the North and from the BRICS on power imbalances, which is precisely the asymmetrical weight of China. So here I come to my last and perhaps most provocative point, which is to think, even if these new initiatives led by the Global South innovate more politically than financially, will they truly be able to tackle deeper structural problems of asymmetry and hierarchy in the international monetary and financial system? Will they really change the structural dependency of the Global South? Will they be able to address questions historically raised by Keynes that any international monetary and financial system whose key currency is a domestic one is by definition a hierarchical system? And I think this is a real challenge. And I return to the question of power distribution because in many ways, the asymmetries we see in the monetary and financial system, they mirror broader asymmetries of power in the international system. And of course, a central element in this shift of power is China's weight. So the question for me is, to what extent will Southern initiatives and experiments, which is what we're discussing in the session, such as the NDB, and also more novel initiatives in the realm of the BRICS, such as the BRICS Pay, the BRICS Bridge, the BRICS Clear, the BRICS Unit, can they really deliver a better outcome for the Global South as a whole, better in terms of reducing dependency, improving access to credit, both short and long term, and of building a more stable system? And to what extent do we risk replacing a system dominated by the dollar in the US with another dominated, say, by China? I think it's worth noting, for example, that even though China accepted the club culture of the New Development Bank, where shares are divided equally, at the very same time it created the AIIB, which is at least twice the size of the NEB, and there China is firmly in control. Also, when we think about initiatives of a new currency or alternative payment systems, I think it's unlikely to think that China will support any initiative that is not compatible with its own individual strategy and interests. So to conclude, I think the challenge of financing climate action in the Global South is in many ways part of a broader and older problem, which is the financing of development itself, which is deeply entangled with the asymmetric and hierarchical structure of the international monetary and financial system. I think perhaps the innovation that the Global South needs is not only technical, but above all institutional and political. And I think these innovations, they are important because they help to reduce systemic asymmetries and improve access to finance, especially for climate-related challenges, since, as we know, the countries that are most exposed to climate risk are often also the most financially vulnerable. But I think the obstacles, they are significant. Achieving this kind of innovation is very difficult in a world where any supranational, in a world where there is no supranational authority to enforce global agreements, and where the Global South, without China, may have more will than actual means to achieve what it wants. So to put differently, and this may be a bit strong, but any Global South initiative that includes China will have to accommodate its dominance, while any initiative that excludes China will have less chance of succeeding. So as we look ahead, I think the question is not only about creating new funds or instruments, but also about rewriting the rules of global finance, the written and the unwritten ones, which is a far more political challenge than a technical one. So here's just some recent research and contributions, and thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. And our last speaker is Christina Hayes. Once again, she's the Undersecretary for Sustainable Economic Development at the Ministry of Finance and Assistant Professor at the Federal University of ABC.
Thank you, Farva, for moderating this session. I just want to say hi to my colleagues here, Luisa, Bruno. Don't worry, Luisa, I pretty much agree with almost everything you said. I also would like to say hi to you and thank you for coming on this Friday morning. I bet you have gone out yesterday. Well, if I was here, I would have gone with you. And it's very nice to see so dear faces and amazing professors and colleagues here. I want to say hi to Professor Ana Célia. It's great to see you, Professor Chandrasekhar. Thank you very much, Professor Jomo. The first time I had the chance to see the east side of the world was in a training promoted by Ideas in China in 2007. I was at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in my master, and I had the chance to meet you and Professor Jayati as well. And it was an amazing experience. I always say that going to China at that time changed my life. The way I see the world, the way I understand how much the civilizations can vary and how we can learn from each other. I also have to say that I'm very happy to see Mariana here, Priscila, Carolina, Fernanda, Marta, some of my dear female professors and amazing experts that have been fighting a lot to really scale up the way we teach economics. So it's a temptation, I don't know if this word exists, and I'm sorry, my English is very rusty, to don't make a theoretical analysis, but once I was invited here to speak in name of the Ministry of Finance, I'm trying to make a speech as a practitioner, right? So I will talk a little bit about the experiments from Global South, as Bruno was doing from his experience at the central bank, but with this theoretical framework that you have shown, Luisa. So in the 2022, me and Professor Tatiana Béranger from the Federal University of ABC, we published this book called South-North Dialogues on Democracy, Development, and Sustainability. And we had different researchers from different sciences studying and working at the Federal University of ABC, dialoguing with researchers from other countries. And the main conclusion, the main thing was, okay, we are living now during the pandemics, this thing that people call the perfect storm. I never enjoyed this expression because in Portuguese, when you say perfect storm, somehow it has a positive meaning. And the perfect storm that they were talking about is the challenges that the world is living now related to the new geopolitical struggles, to the new sustainability imperative, and to the new technologies that are arising, and we are probably living this hegemonic transition, right? So some years ago, I was one of the persons that was saying, I don't know if this dollar supremacy will ever end, but now we have a different framework, and I'm starting to believe that, yeah, maybe we are indeed in this hegemonic transition. But anyway, the way that the sustainability comes, and I will say this really free here, as we are critically thinking in homage of Professor Maria da Conceição Tavares, we know that the new technologies related to sustainability will centralize and concentrate power and wealth in the global north and China and in the usual transnational corporations, but now with new transnational corporations from China as well. So when you are in a developing country in the south, in the global south, and you have to face such an uneven asymmetry in related to the center and periphery relationships, and then out of the sun, then you are at the Ministry of Finance, and you have to develop an agenda for sustainable development. You feel really, really, really tiny, like, oh my gosh, what's my chance here to do something different? But I'm happy to say that since President Lula won the government and could kick out Bolsonaro from there, yeah, we've been working to really change the way that Brazil position itself in the world relationships and international affairs, and the way that we see the paths towards sustainable development domestically. The Ministry of Finance had the first challenge of doing this new fiscal sustainable regime related to the fiscal framework and to promote the tax reform. I say that the consumption tax reform is one of the greatest achievements of this government, and we hope that the wealth reform is also going to win in the parliament. And in parallel to this, we have been developing this ecological transformation plan, which is a medium to long-term view of different development paths that are related to the competences of the Ministry of Finance. So it's not a new development plan, it's a new way to elaborate financial instruments, regulatory instruments, fiscal and tax instruments, and also administration and monitoring ones related to what the Ministry of Finance normally does, right? But the thing is that historically, the way that the macroeconomic regime was managed and the development policies in Brazil have been very unclear and with no coherence. So we are now trying to bring this coherence to the action at the Ministry of Finance. So my speech here will be related to this domestic and international agenda of the Ecological Transformation Plan. Oh my gosh, sorry, I forgot to put this in mute. Yeah, to the Ecological Transformation Plan. And it has 6 pillars, which are sustainable finance, energy transition, bioeconomy and agri-food systems, technological density, bioeconomy, and adaptation infrastructure. Related to sustainable finance, I want to emphasize some of these finance tools because this is the topic of the conference. And then we can discuss how innovative they are. I saw in that text that it was published to describe the aims of the conference, that innovative tools was like being shown at, like, is this really bring innovation, or is this only a way to re-emphasize the common power and wealth relations we know, right? And so from the place I sit, I would say that we have some possibilities to start changing the game with these tools if we really know how to design them. It's not easy, it's super difficult, and it's more a tactic and strategic performance, and that maybe is the only way we have to find this empty space where you could promote change. And I really believe that through regulatory frameworks that are well done, well designed, and through new political partnerships, we can promote this change. So let's provide some examples. First, the first one, the sustainable taxonomy. I'm in charge of the Brazilian Sustainable Taxonomy. We had the happiness to approve it last Monday. And we are talking about 880 pages of technical work made by 350 people with 50 experts that are classifying economic activities and financial assets of 8 sectors and putting not only green goals to these activities, but also economic and social ones. So the Brazilian taxonomy is the first to have included a objective on gender and race equality, and we're gonna push the companies to have a better representativeness of gender and race in there, not only labor force, but also high hierarchy, supply chains, and the way that they go to the market, and the way that they behave with the society in their surrounds. But not only about this achievement, which I think is huge, and it's pretty much related to this fight that Brazil is having regarding the SDG 18 on race equality, and it's very important, and it's being a fight in the United Nations too. But we have enlarged the sectorial coverage of the taxonomy. So the Brazilian taxonomy, such as the Colombian, the Australian, the Chilean, is not only looking to energy and to manufacturing sectors, but also to commodity sectors, to the rural sector, agriculture, livestock, forestry, fishery, the mining and quarrying, tourism, and others that are more related to our economic structure. So we know that the way to achieve sustainable development is related to structural change, not only in terms of sectors, but in terms of the quality of the tasks and activities that are performed in our value chains. So one of the goals of the taxonomy is to increase the density of our value chains and to increase the complexity of our international insertion into regional and global value chains. Moving to the compliance carbon markets and to the voluntary carbon markets too. Last year, we have approved the law that we established, the National Emission Trading System. And many people ask and argue, oh, but what's the importance of these emissions to Brazil? Because more than 50% of the emissions are related to land use and deforestation. Well, the emissions of the manufacturing sector in Brazil is equal to total emissions of Colombia, right? So we have to make the polluters pay, and we have to internalize, if you can talk on these terms as well, microeconomic terms. You have to internalize these negative externalities. So you put a carbon pricing in the pollution, and you can promote a big shift. If you look to the European ETS, which has completed 20 years now, they have generated 200 billion euro in revenues. And what did they do with this money? They have invested in the modernization, innovation, and just transition funds. It's a huge industry policy that they have done to modernize their own manufacturing sector while they were decarbonizing the energy sector, which was totally dependent on coal, right? They shift into natural gas, which is not green, but it's better than coal in this sense. And they want to go further to this new clean energy technologies. But what happened there was they were providing free allowance to the manufacturing sector for years, and they gave a chance to their industries to modernize and to be more able to compete against American and Chinese companies, right? So it's a big industrial policy behind the climate policy. And as Luisa was saying, we always have the same development problems and the structural problems behind the evolution of the financial and productive flows. But then we have to see how those policies, these policies can help us to play this game, right? So I think that the Brazilian ETS system also came, and we can make a regulation for this to promote the change. And how we're gonna incentivize new technologies can really incentivize the science, technology, and innovation network related to these decarbonizing technologies, but not only in the manufacturing and in the energy sector, also in the other sectors that will generate carbon credits in the voluntary markets, and that they can either go to the system, to the compliance market, or be internationally transferred as correspondent adjustments. So yes, indeed, Brazil has a big potential on generating carbon credits. And I was, as we were joking, right, Fernanda, it's not the silver bullet, really, of course it's not. It's a part of one whole plan to really, of sustainable finance instruments that are fighting to reduce this technological and financial dependency, and I will use this word, especially at this house. We have to talk about dependency, right? And imperialism, we could also talk about it. But we are in this game for years, and how we insert this ourselves in the game, that's the call I'm doing here. So moving to other instruments, such as sovereign bonds. Brazil has issued twice sovereign bonds generating $4 billion or 20 billion reais, which were channeled into the climate fund. The climate fund had received only 2 billion reais in 13 years, and with those two issuance of the national treasury, it had gained these resources that are being applied to decarbonize 6 sectors of the economy with much better financial conditions in terms of interest rates and guarantees and deadlines, right? So we are talking about 20 billion reais, and with the Eco Invest program, we had more than 70 billion reais collected, and this is, both of them is innovation in terms of generating lending in national currency and with exchange rate hedging, right? And so these 70 billions of the Eco-Invest are also going towards sustainable activities. And the way, again, we classify sustainability, it makes the whole change. So again, we go to the taxonomy and the importance of it, because it allows us to also determine conditionalities for the fiscal benefits, for the funding, for the financial, for the credits. And so these conditionalities can promote also a shift in the national power relationships. And this is another thing that we have to think about. It's not only about producing and strengthening the manufacturing sector and the productive investment in the global south to play against the power relations in international or global value chains. It's about changing the power is structured domestically, because we know this for years, and this house has also many contributions about this softened thoughts on dependency. If we don't change the way that the elites reproduce the international system domestically, and we know that this way is really primitive, like it's really, they can't stand not even 35% of a wage rate in the national income, so that they can impeach someone because of that. So we really need to look how we're going to change the internal power relationships. So my time is over, but my message here, I hope that it was not too confusing, so that we have opportunities to use those sustainable finance instruments and the climate imperative to try to really redesign, at least in a way, the system, taking opportunity that now, and I will finish with this, Brazil is, again, strong in the international affairs. One more minute, Fava, please. So Brazil was the presidency of G20, of BRICS, of now Mercosul, and COP. And the way that President Lula is positioning Brazil against Trump is really inspiring. And it's not only about inspiration, it's also about change. So Brazil now gained a very, and I can say this from the meetings we have, a strategic position to balance the relationships between Europe and China especially. So we are invited into the discussions just to make this balance. And this is our chance really to build strong political partnerships and to bring the Global South voice into these power relationships, of course, leaving no one behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christina. And I have to mention that I keep hearing about the Ideas China conference, which happened a couple of years ago. So there seems to be great nostalgia attached to that particular conference in China. And together with Charles and Chandru, I think we're going to make it happen next year. So look forward to seeing a lot of you there.